continue this. This is tape 3, and that's my father, Edward the Eighth. That's the double. They used Mary Wallace Simpson. This is Elizabeth, who's living off my money and giving it away. And this is George VI, my he's a legal monarch. Well, the Roosevelt, and this is John Kennedy, whose father was ambassador and helped kidnap me in 41. He was ambassador to Great Britain, and John Kennedy and Joe stayed with their father and, quote, helping him out. Did he help in the kidnapping? What do you think? Anyway, I was working there at Golden Triangle, and this is in 81, and I had called Mary Welcome. I didn't think I could get in touch with her. She was Wayne Williams' attorney. And I got to her, and I said, please don't hang up on me. I know it sounds weird. It doesn't really, but this was back in that period of time when they weren't talking about MK Ultra or mind control or anything like that. I was the only one telling about it that I knew of. And I called her, and she said, oh, I believe you. She said, and she continued, and she said, and by the way, I was put right on the phone with her at the firm she worked for in Atlanta. And she said, I'm going to send one of my attorneys over and take a deposition, and he'll have ID on him. Well, it wasn't long after then that Lina Dempsey, the woman that I grew up being told she was my mother, that had murdered her twins, I paid my rent November of 81. On the 1st or the 3rd, I can't remember, it was on time. I started to walk back, and that was hard to do because by that time, Golden Triangle had suddenly folded and wasn't anymore. It closed doors and left me without a job. And I had just paid the rent, had the receipt in my hand, walked back to my apartment, and the police car's there. And he gets out and smiles at me, and I said, can I help you? And he said, well, we're looking for Peggy Childers. And I said, well, that'd be me. And, of course, that's not my real name. I've never been allowed to use it. But he handcuffed me and said, we have a warrant that Lina Dempsey, and, of course, when they call her my mother, it sends chills through me. This psychopath was never anything. I mean, can you believe I was stolen from a loving family and brought over and dumped into a pigsty, and all this happens to me right in front of everybody in plain sight? So this, I'm handcuffed and locked up, and I thought, well, they'll kill me this time. They'll send me off to the state, which was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I said, I'll never see the light of day again. Okay, the one thing I managed to do before I left was yell at the manager's daughter, Christine, and I said, please call Jack, and I'll leave his name out here. He was a reporter for the Huntsville Times and a friend. And they hauled me off to, it's a mental ward within a regular hospital. My thing was I was afraid, too, they were going to give me psychotic drugs and I would just be undone. Well, Jack showed up, and my attorney was one that I had met, Henry Mims, and thank goodness he was a good attorney. I believe he knew Mary Welcome, I'm not sure. But anyway, he was a good attorney, and I was glad to get him because I couldn't have afforded him. I just happened to have met him after I had spoken with Mary on the phone earlier about the Wayne Williams murders. And 30 days later, day before Thanksgiving, I was released, and Jack was the one that saved my life. That was a horrific, horrible thing that went on there. And Susan was a friend of his, and she was a professor, or had been, sociology at the University of Alabama there, and she had a lot done to her that's associated with, like, her attorney what was his name? Oh me. He was the one that won. I'm trying to think of his name after the attorney Simpson I worked for had lost. And he was her attorney. And it had something to do with Peter Abbott and the a ring. And Susan had stolen a ring and then a lot of other stuff, and she was supposed to testify, and she did for 2020, and then they cut it out. The night that she testified in Jacksonville, Florida, and we were both sitting there going to watch it. They did a part of 2020 on the Hells Angels motorcycle group. Then they were going to switch it to Susan Boulder, and that the testimony surrounding her testimony, and suddenly it switched. It went back to what we'd already seen about the Hells Angels. For it, so in essence, the last half hour wasn't done about Susan. It switched and was a rerun on what they just shown, the Hells Angel motorcycle group. So showing you they had stuff. Susan tried, and she had been a professor of sociology, and then later someone told me that she had been CIA and her husband. Now I don't know if that's true or not, but I have a feeling it may well have been. But anyway, I keep saying anyway, I'm doing this from memory. Um, so Susan cooked Thanksgiving dinner. I'd been released from their ward there, mental ward, and I'm all this time I couldn't get to my sons. I'd seen them maybe one or two times, and I was afraid to even try to tell them because they would have said it to their dad. And he's got my apartment, and I let it go. I couldn't do anything. I didn't have a place to live or was barely getting by most of the time. And I can remember Scott saying, "Mom, I want to come over here and live with you." And you know, it. I have cried and screamed up on the mountain where I lived on the Appalachian Trail, because at least up there I could scream, because nobody wants to hear any of this because of they did it. This country did it to me, and they're still doing it to me. But they're just not interested in it. And I felt so bad. How can I tell my son the truth? Because if I tell him all of it, then I don't know that their father's not going to kill them, because he was mean to them anyway. Um, so I only saw them a few times, but then I'm going to skip um, in. Okay, it was after then. Okay, I'd paid the rent, and instead of being able to stay in my apartment, Warren House, I was locked up and stayed for a month, got out the day before Thanksgiving. Susan cooked dinner for me and Jack. And believe me, Jack showed up in court there. Myrtle Green was a probate judge, and you got judges representing Lana Dempsey. And they had my divorce papers, which if I'd had the divorce enforced, I'd had money from my ex-husband to live on. Wouldn't have had to work, I would have, but here's this woman that I grew up being told she's my mother. She's a killer. She is having me locked up trying to kill me using the mental health system. Judge McCoy was the attorney. He was a former judge there, not too long before I came there, and friends with Myrtle Green, who's the probate judge that'll send me off. And that's exactly what they were trying to do, and use the mental health system to kill me. And Jack was one that came in and barreled in, wouldn't leave, with the judge threatening him. Now, he's a reporter, and he went out and brought in, he had to go out and collect a reporter or two for me. One was from Birmingham and demand to come in, and Myrtle Green telling, I don't know what, she threatened them. But Jack did it, so Jack saved my life. And so then when I'm out, I don't have a job. I'm going to get evicted again because the month's been used up while they had me locked up. And so they were going to evict me. I left, and I had enough money to get to Atlanta at night. The and that's all I had to buy the bus ticket. Didn't have enough for a cup of coffee or anything. The bus driver talked to me, and I still had the letter from the FBI on me, and I had the letter where they finally they'd done a talk screen. Finally, how many days later? 9 days later, and there was still antifreeze that showed up in the talk screen. Now my ex-husband was the one they let have that. They didn't let me have it. Remember, that's why I went in the first place to the first emergency room in Atlanta, and then in Huntsville. After Saturday night, the 5th of April, this is the following Wednesday, that talk screen is done, and it comes back not from Alabama where it should, but from Atlanta, Georgia, and it shows antifreeze in me. My ex-husband gets it. They won't let me have it. So I still have this on me. So people believed I always had where I did the book and all this. So it's not that they didn't believe me. They just didn't want to become involved. But he helped that night when I got there. He gave me, I guess on the bus they get a discount, the drivers. Anyway, for 2 nights he put me up at the Barclay. And during that time I called and tried to find my ex-husband. And lo and behold, I called his former employer where I knew he worked. And lo and behold, he showed up at my door and at the Barclay. And he threatened me. He said, if you don't stop, you even try to come back over here, I'm going to have you locked up like Lina Dempsey. That's the woman that I was told was my mother growing up and killed the twins. Well, he held true to that, and I'm going to jump from, I ended up, and that's when I stayed with Marshall Carnwright for a couple of, 3 nights, I believe, and he bought my ticket back to Huntsville to nowhere. I had no place to go. When I got there, I called the apartments I just left, Warren House, and I've been evicted, so I stayed with the lady next door for 2 weeks, and I suddenly have a job for Computer Science Corporation, and was able to get an apartment. But then suddenly, after I'd worked there a while, 2 people I didn't know when I went to work that afternoon. I'm doing Navy manuals, by the way. How's this? And they started screaming for me to get out, that on my resume I didn't put down that I'd worked for the district attorney. So I'm out the door, and I'm going to skip to go into D.C. and the horrific things that happen with no money, looking for a job, I can't get one, and my apartment at Haystack, they're going to the new apartment I had while after coming back from Atlanta. I'm going to be evicted from there. I can't get a job, nothing. I go to D.C. and I'm on the street. You can't tell. I'm going to the FBI office there because I had the letter from them, and I'm going to leave out what was done to me. All of it's so unreal. I ended up going to the Capitol and turning stuff over, and I didn't know about my real name, thank God, or they would have had a heyday. You think you're the Queen of England? Why, don't you know that the Queen of England's over there, right? So she says. They didn't want it told. There's too many of them. Sparkman and all of them knew it. So I'm going to skip to me walking out in October from D.C. in shoes that had 2 straps on them, cold as hell, carrying the book and all that stuff that loaded me down, letter from the FBI where I'd done the book, all this. And I'm going to skip what happened to me during that walking and getting in cars and trying to make it back to Atlanta and didn't know where the boys were and thought my apartment was gone. And this is where I'm going to have to go into the third. Is this the third one now that I am going to get confused? But I wanted to tell this one, the next one coming up.